If you've been to a protest or have been paying attention to the news lately, there's a good chance you've heard this.
Defund the police.
Defund police departments.
Defund the police.
It's a rallying cry that has gained traction following the killing of George Floyd by police and the outbreak of global protests against anti-Black racism and police brutality. In past high-profile cases of Black Americans being killed by police, activists have called for police reform. But now they're pushing for a more radical change, defunding police departments and reimagining what public safety looks like.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
Before talking about the idea of a world without the police, we have to understand how they came to be in the first place. Police forces in northern colonial America were initially developed in response to an increase in immigration, which caused a population boom and racial and ethnic conflict. In the South, the first police departments were known as slave patrols, whose sole purpose was maintaining control of enslaved African Americans. And in Canada, early police forces were developed to forcibly remove Indigenous people from their lands.
And you can see how the police engage with Indigenous and Black communities to this day remains connected to that history of our humanity not being respected from that institution at its very inception.
Although defunding the police seems like a pretty straightforward concept, there's still a spectrum of thought around it. On one end, you have groups that want to defund the police and eventually abolish police departments entirely. And then on the other end, there's people that want to simply cut some money from police budgets and scale back their activities. Regardless, the basic concept is this: money should be taken away from police departments and reinvested in social services like education, housing, mental health, and alternatives to policing. And that idea has already started to become a reality in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where George Floyd was killed. The majority of members of the city council there recently announced that they intend to defund and dismantle the city's police department.
5 years ago, when people went out on the streets after the police murder of Tamir Rice and Eric Garner and Mike Brown and so many others, people were told, don't worry, we're going to fix it. We're going to give the police implicit bias training. We're going to have police community encounter sessions. We're going to give them body cameras and everything will be fine. But now it is clear to everyone that the police are not going to reform themselves and that the only option is to take their toys away and diminish the scope of their power.
And while defund the police is now a part of the mainstream lexicon, it is not a new idea. Its roots can be traced back to the late 60s and early 70s, when the concept of community control of the police began to take form in academic circles and within groups like the Black Panthers. But the idea of defunding the police, as we now understand it today, emerged from the period of mass incarceration in the 80s and 90s, and the development of the prison abolition movement.
There were dozens of campaigns underway across the country before these recent events calling for dialing back police budgets and shifting those resources.
The idea is based on a recognition that policing itself is a form of harm, especially for Black communities, and that no amount of reform or training will be effective at preventing future police violence because it's an institution designed by the state to use violence to fix problems. And over the last few decades, across North America, the police have increasingly become the go-to solution to more and more of society's problems.
We're asking cops to do too much in this country. We are. We're just asking us to do too much. Every societal failure, we put it off on the cops to solve. Not enough mental health funding. Let the cop handle it. Not enough drug addiction funding. Let's give it to the cops.
And then we tell the police they're waging a war on crime and a war on drugs and a war on gangs and a war on immigrants, and we've infused them with not just military equipment, but a military ethos that gets them to view the public as this force to be neutralized.
In both Canada and the United States, Black people are more likely to be killed by police officers than white people are.
But beyond killing us, we know that we're disproportionately arrested, disproportionately surveilled, disproportionately jailed, So we're talking about systemic racism. We're not just picking police and a couple of incidents of death. We're talking about the conditions of our lives every day.
Opponents of defunding the police often favor police reform instead and say, if we abolish the police, what are we going to do when violent crimes occur, like murder and rape?
Murders and rapes happen even with these massive police forces. And mostly they come and just take a report afterwards. They're not preventing that stuff from happening sufficiently. Where are the prevention interventions?
People like Vitali and others argue that getting rid of the police also requires coming up with alternatives to policing that better serve community needs and that address the social factors that lead people to commit crimes in the first place, such as addiction or poverty. For example, taking millions of dollars from the police budget and allocating those funds to build public housing, or developing a mental health response program to assist people in crisis. There are many obstacles that lie ahead, though. While Black Lives Matter has gained significant public support in the last few months, the police are historically popular, especially among white Americans. But in a time when local budgets are strained due to the recession caused by the coronavirus pandemic, and as lawmakers across the US and Canada re-examine public safety amid weeks of protests against anti-Black racism, activists are arguing there's no better time to divert funds from police departments to communities in need.
People have lost the thread, and they've forgotten that the purpose of our interventions is not to decide whether the police are responsible or not, but it's to stop violence and death from happening in the first place and provide appropriate and caring responses. And that's what abolition means. It means providing a caring, non-lethal response instead of pretending police can solve every problem. We have to decide what our priorities are and why the violence has been the priority for so long. It has to change.